Walk into your kitchen right now and imagine that you smell gas. And you may not know where it's coming from, and you may not understand the chemistry. You may not know whether the leak is coming from the stove, the furnace, or maybe even a pipe that's hidden somewhere inside the wall. But you know one thing immediately: something's wrong. So you get the people outside. You avoid flipping switches. You call for help. That smell, it gives you a warning, right? It gives you time. But natural gas does not automatically arrive in your home smelling like that. The odor that most of us actually recognize is deliberately added so an invisible danger can almost announce itself before it's, well, too late. And there is a reason America learned to take that warning seriously. Because on March 18th, 1937, hundreds of children, teachers, they sat inside one of the wealthiest rural schools in the United States. Gas was collecting beneath the building. There was no unmistakable odor. There wasn't an alarm. There wasn't an evacuation. There was no warning telling them to run. Shortly after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there was an electrical spark that was believed to have ignited the gas. In a fraction of a second, most of the school was destroyed. About 295 students and teachers lost their lives. And it remains the deadliest school disaster in American history. But this is not only the story of how a school exploded, it's the story how it's a town that was built by oil. There was a danger that was beneath the floor, a routine decision that nobody believed would become catastrophic, and the children who never smelled the warning that millions of us rely on today. This is New London, Texas, and every time you smell leaking gas, a piece of this forgotten story reaches into your home. What do you think of that, Meg?
Wowza.
Wowza indeed. That's all you got to say is
Yeah.
wowza? Yeah. Sticking with the school theme last week, if you hadn't, excuse me, we did a little bit of a two-parter because we found a lot of information, a lot of research. And while I was doing the research and finding the information, this was one that popped up all over the place. And the only reason why I'm doing this, not to continually do the school stuff, and unfortunately the disasters do happen a lot. But a lot of the disasters that happen come things that we just think is natural. And this is kind of a story, you know? I mean, not so long ago, we had a big old dog who turned on our stove.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a gas leak and it ignited. And now our, pasta dish that we worked so hard for was up in flames. Thankfully, we were home. But it's just something that happens a lot. And there was a lot of comments on the previous video of Bath, Michigan, how all of these people have never heard of it.
That's wild.
Yeah, and people that lived in Michigan had never heard of it. There was somebody who said they lived less than 20 or 30 minutes away from it. Never heard of it. And I don't understand why we're not talking about it. Maybe because it's a small town, big disaster. But again, this isn't, I believe at the time, a pretty small town. Let's see here. And it's one of those places. It's New London. It's New York. And there is a couple in New London. It is the one in Texas. Obviously there. I was trying to see how much population you think is in New London, Texas, Meg. If you had to guess, roughly. Any guesses?
I'm going to say 1,300.
Okay, the population of New London, Texas is approximately 958 to 1,100 residents. So
not too bad.
So again, it's an 8.6 square mile city in Rusk County. So again, small town, big story. The first thing you type if you put in New London, Texas is, well, guess what? gas explosion. So big story. I wanted to travel back to 1937 and do this. So what do you think? Should we get on getting?
Let's do it.
All right. So before we go back to 1937, let's talk about the smell, Meg. Not the fact that I had just had some hard-boiled eggs. Not that smell. We're talking the smell. Because what most of us call the smell of natural gas is not actually the natural gas itself, is it?
Right.
And I'm sure you've heard of this, and maybe other people are like, duh. But maybe some people don't know that this natural gas has an odor.
Right.
And we live in a very small town where we don't have natural gas feeding into our homes. We have fuel oil and propane and stuff like that. But the odor that people recognize usually comes from chemicals that are added specifically so that there is a leak, it can actually be detected. And the reason I brought up the eggs is because a lot of people often describe it as rotten eggs or sulfur, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something that's so offensively wrong that you can't ignore it. That's the point of it, right?
Right.
It's supposed to bother you. So modern gas distribution rules generally require that combustible gas, to be detectable by someone with a normal sense of smell, while the concentration is still far below the level where it actually could ignite something.
Mm-hmm.
Technology's evolved since then, right? The
Correct.
warning is designed to reach you before the room becomes a bomb, right?
Right.
But in early years of the natural gas industry, dependable odorization, that'd be a funny band name. Next on stage, dependable odorization.
Yeah.
Nah, once you say it out loud like that, I don't like it.
Boo.
Boo. Dependable odorization, it was not yet a universal safety standard. So gas could just simply enter a building without producing the unmistakable warning that we all expect today, right? That was especially dangerous in oil field communities where residue gas was cheap, it was plentiful, and it often treated as one of the benefits of living near oil production. Hey, they're pumping this right out of the gas. Guess what? You're going to get this for pretty much nothing. So it'd come from the ground into a place like a school, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because the gas could not be seen, people depended on smell. There was no reliable odor. There might be no obvious reason to suspect anything was wrong. A room could look absolutely normal. A hallway could look normal. A classroom could look normal. Meanwhile, the air itself could be changing. And this is the time where you could still probably smoke in classrooms while you were teaching a class, right? It's wild to think, but I mean,
wild times.
It's almost 100 years ago. It was different. It was
Mm-hmm.
back when teachers could still beat you with a ruler when you were out of line.
Mm-hmm.
You were still scared of the staff. But this is, with all this, the air itself was changing. It was undeniable, undetectable. And this is the part of New London I feel like that I can't get out of my head since researching. For most of the people inside the school, everything appeared completely ordinary until the second it wasn't. That's 3 weeks in a row. Everything was just good until it wasn't. Almost every episode,
Mm-hmm.
But here, there was no smell that told them to leave. There was no alarm that gave teachers time to move students out. The danger, well, it was already in the building. And on March 18th, 1937, all it needed was one spark. So let me ask you this, Meg. Before researching this, so for anybody that doesn't know, I do a lot of the research and write notes. Meg comes in here, adds her tidbits, right? So did you know that the gas smell was deliberately added?
I did.
So you wouldn't assume that natural gas was just an odorless.
Correct.
Good. I feel like there's a lot more people these days that knew, but maybe not. It's kind of surprising and scary sometimes when people don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one of those things. I feel like almost everybody recognizes the smell, but nobody knows the town that was actually connected to that smell. New London, you're never going to forget. That's going to be good on a trivia question someday, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we mentioned earlier, New London, it sits in Rusk County in East Texas. So before oil changed the region, this was a largely like one of those small town agricultural areas. Relatable. Families, they lived through, the farm life, whether it was, timber, cotton, there was lots of churches and small communities. Then came one of the greatest oil discoveries in American history. 1930, Meg, oil was discovered in East Texas. What a time to be alive,
Woo.
except for the old Great Depression. The oil field stretched across several counties and transformed the region pretty quickly. Derricks, they appeared across the landscape. Roads, they filled with the trucks. Workers arrived from across the country, and land that seemed ordinary suddenly was pretty valuable, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And remember, when this was happening, it was still the Great Depression. So across much of the U.S., banks were failing, families, they were losing their homes, unemployment was just absolutely devastating communities. People, they were standing in bread lines. I mean, could you imagine that? Hopefully, it's nothing that we have to go through, and especially, hopefully, not our kids.
Mm-hmm.
Having to stand in a bread line just so your family can get a little bit of some food.
Mm-hmm.
It's terrifying. But while all this is going on, parts of East Texas were experiencing something pretty different because oil money was pouring into local tax bases. The London School District, well, guess what? They benefited pretty good. It became one of the wealthiest rural school districts in the entire country. And that wealth showed up in its school. The district, it could afford a building that rural communities elsewhere could only dream about. I mean, I'm sure we have gone through some really small schools, and
Mm-hmm.
you're going, oh my gosh, this is still what the school looks like in 2026. They
Mm-hmm.
probably go to other schools, maybe playing sports, and maybe that's what they dream of. I can't wait to get out of this.
Right.
Why does this school still look like 1950? Why is that TV still being rolled out on a cart? But the London Consolidated School was large, it was modern, it was built with steel and concrete. It included classrooms, labs, administrative offices, vocational spaces, and it had a separate gym nearby. Represented progress. Families looked at the school and saw opportunity. Their kids, they were not, being educated inside a worn out one room schoolhouse anymore. They were attending a modern institution that was financed by the benefit of what was underneath the ground. Oil had given New London jobs, it had given the district money, and it had given the kids that were at the school what looked like a pretty bright future. The tragedy is that the same industry that was enriching the community also placed a pretty invisible danger beneath its proudest building. I mean, the contrast is wild to me, isn't it, Meg? The
Mm-hmm.
rest of America is struggling through the Depression, and this town has enough oil money to build one of the finest rural schools in the country. I mean, so let me ask you this. At this point, does that make what happens feel even more shocking to you?
Um.
Or about the same?
Yeah. About this, I still feel the same.
Still feel the same. Okay. All right. Nobody looked at that building and saw neglect. They saw success. They saw safety. They saw proof that their town was doing everything right. That's wild, right? So by 1937, guess how many students and teachers were roughly inside that school during the day?
200.
Good guess. 500 students and 40 teachers.
That
Remember, because it
wasn't
was a
even close.
consolidated school. So, you know, which at this point, according to their census, that's that's over half of their entire population are kids and teachers. These, obviously they were children from families that were spread throughout the surrounding oil field. Some, they lived close enough to walk. Others depended on school buses, traveling through a landscape crowded with wells, pipelines, tanks, and drilling equipment. The school was not simply where children attended classes, it was the center of community life. Parents, they would go there for meetings. Students, they prepared for competitions, performances, stuff like that. The gym, it had gatherings. The school size and modern design made it a source of, well, enormous local pride. A lot of local people, they take pride in their school and their gym, don't they? Even to this day.
Yes.
You put a mural up outside of school, It can cause some controversy, but boy, does it look cool, right?
Correct.
But one feature of the building would become pretty critical and important because the school had been constructed on sloping ground. There was a large enclosed space beneath part of it. Think of it as a broad, hollow area under the floors. You picturing it?
Hmm.
It wasn't a basement where people were constantly walking around. It wasn't a room that someone checked every morning. It was a concealed space that was beneath the building where leaking gas could just collect.
By concealed, you mean there's like no entry to it?
There's got to be an entrance, whether it was exterior or interior. But think of it as, you know what I mean, kind of like an unfinished basement in a house.
Like a boiler room.
Yeah, it's something that you have all the stuff in, but you're not going down there every day. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Okay.
So it's a place where the gas collects, right? And gas behaves differently depending on its composition, its ventilation, and surroundings. But in an enclosed area, a leak can mix with air until it reaches a concentration, unfortunately, that's capable of exploding. Once that mixture develops, the danger does not require a bonfire. Just one little teeny tiny something can ignite it. It could be an electrical contact. It could be simply a motor running, a light switch. It could be a spark that's so small that under normal circumstances, nobody even notices. I mean, how many times have you seen, a light switch or something? You do it, and there's just that little teeny tiny
Hmm.
spark. The school, though, I mean, it was strong, steel framed. It was built to last, but strength can work against you when explosive pressure develops inside a pretty tiny space. I mean, the walls hold the pressure for as long as they can, and the building itself becomes part of the problem. Concrete, brick, glass, wood, desks, pipes, and steel are thrown with pretty incredible force. Nobody looking at the London school from outside would have seen a building waiting to collapse. They saw a safe place, a modern place, a place built for kids. But beneath their feet is a space that almost nobody ever thought about. And soon, something was entering it. So, to give a little backstory on the school, it originally purchased natural gas from a utility. That gas heated the building. But in an oil field, gas was everywhere. So companies extracting and processing petroleum often dealt with residue gas as part of their operations. Throughout East Texas, homes, churches, businesses, schools sometimes would connect to nearby lines to use that gas because it was cheap. In some circumstances, it was treated almost like a byproduct available for the taking. The practice was common enough that people did not automatically view it as reckless, which I think that context matters, right? Because it's easy almost 90 years later to imagine somebody sneaking around the dark, making, insane connections that would kill people eventually.
Hmm.
That's not what the historical records were showing. They showed in January 1937 the district stopped purchasing its regular gas and connected the school to that overflow residue gas line that was associated with the Parade Gasoline Company. So the connection was made with the approval and knowledge of the people in charge of the school. They wanted to save money. Every school does, right?
Right.
And at that time, they were going to save about $300 a month. $300 in 1937, it's quite a bit of money.
Right.
So school officials, they were responsible for controlling the expenses. They had access to a fuel source that many other people in the region were already using. On paper, it probably looked like a pretty practical decision, right?
Hmm.
And that's why the story, it matters beyond one school. The worst disasters, they don't always begin with a decision that feels evil or crazy or absurd. Sometimes they're just routine, something other people are already doing, something that saves money, something that seems to work perfectly well until it doesn't. The decision to change the fuel source, it didn't cause an immediate disaster. The school didn't explode the first day, didn't explode the first week. Teachers, they kept teaching. Students, they just kept walking the halls. They were saving money. The building was still there. Everything about the decision seemed like it worked. But investigators would later conclude that gas escaped from a faulty connection and moved into that space. And because the residue gas did not carry that odor, nobody knew what was going on.
Hmm.
The district could see the money it was saving, Nobody could see what was gathering beneath the floor. Ugh.
That's terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, things are working good. You do want to save some money. And like you said, everybody else seems to be doing it. Why not save some money? All right. So I feel like we just quickly need to imagine the slow leak, right? It's not a roaring pipe. It's not a dramatic cloud that's pouring into a hallway. It's a bad connection. It's just gas escaping where people couldn't see it. It entered the space and just mixed with the air. And it requires, like, I don't want to say perfect, but the right amount of combination because too little gas with the air in the mixture, it's not going to ignite. Too much gas without enough oxygen, it's not going to ignite either.
Hmm.
But for whatever reason, this air mixed to a point that it just dangerously grew. You know what I mean? Hour after hour, day after day, still no odor, and nobody knew what was going on. But later, there were reports of possible signs that there was some things going a little wrong because people started to mention headaches, irritation of the eyes,
Mm.
and just kind of unusual conditions that started to pop up around the building. And historical records even indicated that there had been evidence of leaking gas on other days.
Interesting.
Yeah, but the surviving evidence doesn't really allow anybody to create a neat story where everyone understood exactly the warning signs and, people ignoring them or whatever,
Hmm.
because they didn't truly understand what was going on. I mean, after a disaster, every unusual detail suddenly looks like such an obvious warning sign. Oh, you had a strange sound. All these people were getting headaches and their eyes were hurting. Duh. Of course there's a gas leak. In the moments you don't, you know,
Hmm.
they're not connected. They're just ordinary. People seem to interpret danger using what they knew at the time. So, I mean, the building seemed still normal, right?
Right.
All right. Let's talk about the day. March 18th, 1937. It was a Thursday. They were, the students were preparing for an interscholastic meet. It was scheduled at nearby Henderson. Because of those preparations, the school schedule was not entirely ordinary. Some of the younger students, they had already been dismissed. Older kids remained inside the building. Nearby mothers had gathered in the separate gym for a little PTA meeting. That placed many parents close to the school when the explosion occurred, close enough to hear it, close enough to see the building disappear behind dust, close enough to begin running before anyone could organize an official response. School bus driver and janitor Lonnie Barber had already begun transporting some of the younger kids home. That meant that there were families whose smallest kids were safe, while the older ones were not.
Mm.
I mean, that's a tough emotional whiplash, huh?
Right.
One kid's safe on a bus, then the family learns the school explodes. But while all this is going on, I mean, classes did continue. Students worked in their areas, teachers prepped for, the end of the afternoon. The school day was almost over. That's what makes this even more brutal. It wasn't the beginning of a long morning. They were minutes from leaving. Buses would soon carry students home. Families, they were prepping for supper. Kids had plans for that evening, plans for the weekend, plans for the competition. Nobody saw this, you know, invisible countdown, right? There was no clock displaying like in a movie. But as students moved through the final minutes, gas and air, they were waiting beneath them. Some of the accounts and records placed the explosion at 3:17 in the afternoon. The Texas State Historical Association said the time was about 3:05. The exact minutes will always be disputed. What is certain, it is shortly after 3 o'clock. Students and teachers were still inside. In the manual, training shop instructor Lemmy Butler prepared to use an electric sanding machine. Investigators concluded later that that machine was probably what provided the spark. Normal motion, a normal machine, the kind of switch that had probably been used hundreds of times. There was no reason for anyone to believe that him using that would blow up a school. But the
Right.
danger wasn't the switch. The danger was in the air, right? When the machine was turned on, the disaster began.
Man,
Yeah, what are you thinking?
it's just scary how quick something can change like that
Isn't it?
with no warning.
No. Especially at that time, there's no, you know, emergency response teams, that can do that. There's no text activation. We're in 1937, Great Depression. I mean,
Mhm.
and then, obviously there's the chaos of, trying to, get volunteers, to get, the local fire department, to get anybody that will help to just try to get into that school, to try
Mhm.
to see who they could help, who was there. I just couldn't imagine that scene. It's just god awful. The death toll from New London is often presented as if one universally accepted number exists, but it doesn't. Different sources give different slightly totals. The American Society of the Mechanical Engineers said 294, others said 295. The State Historical of Association of Texas said it was like approximately 298. Between the kids and the teachers. I
A
guess,
lot.
yeah, 200, almost 300 people, most of them kids. And the uncertainty, it doesn't mean that historians have no idea what happened. It just reflects the chaos that surrounded the disaster. I mean, records themselves were damaged. Families and students, they were spread across the oil field. Some victims were tough to identify. You know what I mean? Early newspapers, they even published conflicting totals before officials completed their work. So they were just throwing out numbers. The uncertainty itself, I think, tells us something, though. The explosion, it didn't merely damage a building, it disrupted the systems that were used to determine who was present, who was gone, who was injured, who was missing. Approximately 500 students and 40 teachers were believed to be inside the building, and only around 130 were believed to escape, you know, with injuries. Those numbers are staggering.
Mhm.
But numbers create distance. 295 can become a statistic, a historical fact, something that memorized and repeated. But New London didn't lose numbers. They didn't lose stats, right? They lost kids that had eaten breakfast that morning, teachers who just wanted to go home after a long day, siblings that were in different classrooms, seniors that were preparing to graduate. Families lost their future in individual pieces. And just like last week's and all of these, you know, the funeral process begins across the community, which has to be unbelievable, one after the other. You don't get time, you're always grieving.
Mhm.
Pleasant Hill Cemetery became one of the places where the scale of the tragedy would be seen row after row. Texas funeral directors, they had to send more people in to assist. Churches were packed with services, and the same oil field roads that had carried the workers towards opportunity were carrying families toward funerals. It's just,
Tragic.
I mean, the most tragic, right?
Mm.
All right, let's start to wrap this up. You good with that?
Mhm.
I mean, so obviously we talked about how the smell is now a thing that we recognize, and the Texas legislature, they acted in 1937 after the explosion. They gave the Railroad Commission of Texas authority to adopt rules governing the odorization of the natural gas. The purpose was very direct. Gas needed to carry a warning that people could recognize before the concentration became explosive. So odorization does not make gas harmless, doesn't stop a pipe from leaking, it doesn't repair bad equipment, it doesn't replace inspections and ventilation and all that other stuff. It just gives people information. It turns invisible threat into something that the body can notice. So
Mhm.
several months after the disaster, technology for reliable injecting measured amounts of odorant into gas systems advanced. The American Society of Mechanical Engineers recognizes a meter type gas odorizer developed in response because of the New London. And that's pretty important
Mhm.
especially for engineering. That's a landmark, right?
Right.
So by the end of World War II, odorization helped natural gas establish a much stronger reputation as safe household fuel. I mean, today, federal safety rules generally require gas and distribution lines to be readily detectable by a person with a normal sense of smell, while it can still well below the concentration where it can explode. There are technical expectations for certain systems and industrial uses, but for gas reaching ordinary homes and businesses, the principle is now deeply established. That way, a leak, it should warn you. And that smell, oof, that smell, it's not accidental, right?
Mm-hmm.
Chemicals, they're added because humans need an unmistakable signal. Something that's going to interrupt dinner, someone that's going to wake you up from your sleep, make a worker stop what they're doing and be like, what's that smell? Is Matt over there hard boiling eggs again today? It's all because of this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one moment, one tragic moment. And it does suck that sometimes tragedies have to lead to this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But after the funerals, after the rules, after the passes and everything, New London still had kids that survived who needed a school. Classes, they resumed in temporary buildings. 30 surviving seniors completed their final year with a replacement school. And the new building, it rose near the same site, but safety became a pretty big concern. Rebuilding did not mean the town had recovered, it meant life had to continue while that grief remained everywhere. Children returned to class without classmates. Teachers, some of them faced rows of empty seats. Parents passed the place where the old school had stood. The community, it could rebuild walls much faster than it could be rebuilt itself. 1939, a pink granite dedication to those who died was put up, and it stands as a memorial near the school site still. The London Museum now preserves photos and documents, personal belongings, testimony that was connected to this disaster. The museum gives names and faces back to a story that too often reduced to one horrifying number. But for decades, many survivors, they didn't speak openly about what they experienced. I mean, trauma was now New London's culture. Some families, they talked about the explosion in whispers. Others, they just avoided it completely. Formal survivor gatherings, they didn't begin until many, many years later. Silence can look like forgetting from the outside, but New London, they never forgot. Survivors carried with the school, and it carried with them. They carried memories of classrooms, friends, teachers, the sound of explosion, the dust, the searches through the night, the funerals. America moved forward. Other disasters, they would eventually enter the headlines. Wars began, presidents changed, new schools were built, natural gas spread into more homes. Millions of people came to recognize the warning odor without ever being taught why it was there. And that brings us back to the kitchen, Meg. You smell gas, you stop, right?
Mm-hmm.
You recognize danger before you can see it. You leave the building, you call for help. Hopefully, nothing explodes. Hopefully, nobody's injured. But maybe the moment becomes just a frightening story that your family tells a little later, right? But you don't think of New London, Texas, do you?
No.
You may never know the names of the children who entered the school on March 18, 1937, but the warning reaches you anyway. The children inside London School, they didn't have that warning. There was no unmistakable odor that their teachers could smell, no detectors, no alarms. The lesson came afterward, through investigation, through new laws, through better equipment, through regulations written because the cost of doing nothing had become impossible to ignore. History, it's not always locked inside a museum. It's not always a monument that's beside a road. Sometimes history is built into the system right around us, right? A stronger bridge, a safer building, a warning label, an emergency exit, or an awful smell telling you to run. New London, they lost almost 300 lives. That exact total, it'll probably never be completely settled, but the legacy is, it's not difficult to find. It enters homes every day, protects people who have never heard the town's name. What do you think, Meg? Before we get out of here, is the part of this story that will carry with them after all these episodes and the story's done.
Pay attention.
Pay attention.
Check things that aren't normal.
Agree.
Go with your gut.
I like it. The children of New London, they never smelled danger. Because of what had happened to them, millions of people now can. Every place has a story, and this one may have already saved your life. This has been the Your Town Podcast. Real places, real people, real stories. Want to do it again next Monday?
Mm-hmm.
You got anything else?
No.
What are you laughing at?
You went into like radio voice at the end.
I was super serious. I was trying to take us out of here. That's all we got.
Sorry.
Me and my radio voice, we're out of
It
here.
was just different. It was like a weatherman.
You're obsessed with weathermen.
Sorry.
I'll try to go back to school, okay? Unreal. That's all we got. You got anything else, Meg?
Nope.
What'd you think? Tragic, but
Again, I can't believe we've never heard of this one.
I know.
Being as like large of a scale as it was.
That's what we're here. Unbelievable stories that people should know. And now you're never going to forget. When you smell gas, when you think of this, what are you going to think of?
I'm going to think of this school.
New London.
I'm going to walk in the kitchen when I leave here and be like, what's that?
Don't be alarmed because, again, I did just hard boil some eggs. It might smell like rotten eggs in there.
That's what I was going to.
All right. Let's get out of here. We got things to do, places to be, travels to be traveled, and stories to be told. So we'll be back next week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.